and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. My name is Effie Kilmer with Microsoft, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Ido Biger, Chief Data Officer and Technology Officer at Delek US, and Ron Thompson, Chief Data Officer at Quantum Space. And Ron, with the Evidence Act coming out in the public sector, it almost seemed like it was a checkbox of having a chief data officer. Okay, we've checked the box there, but really getting down to the nitty gritty of what that means inside of an organization. How do you set a data strategy? How do you get the right people in place? For you, that must have been a challenge of delivering value quickly. What were some of the use cases and challenges that you overcame during your time?
Yeah, I think the compliance aspect of the job, did require report to Congress, a lot of reporting to OMB. In the federal space, we had a roadmap, and that roadmap is still valid and still being worked by the Chief Data Officers Council across government. And basically in that roadmap, the way it works is, the first 2 to 3 years are the discovery phase, really what's out there, inventory of things, setting up governance. And the next, it really follows the maturation of the CDO role itself, right? And the next is adding value to business. So that's 3 to 5 years out, and then ultimately be a data-driven culture for the organization. So that's roughly the main waves of the federal roadmap. I found, and again, this is years of working in various agencies. I've held the CIO role before, CDO role. Towards the twilight of the career, I found you don't start, Effie, with those compliance, heavy-handed compliance mandates. It's sort of, that is your responsibility as a chief data officer to do that. But if you start conversations with the business about, hey, we have to comply with the Evidence Act, or we need to do this checklist here, I think you will quickly be dismissed, and not really showing value. So if I have really words of wisdom to pass along, is do not start with that compliance mindset. What you're doing is changing the culture of the organization to be data driven, right? You want to make sure you have guiding principles like FAIR, making sure the data is accessible. I always like to say it's liberating the data, right? You need to make sure it's findable and accessible. So you need a list of things to start out with. You need to make sure you can get to it. You need to really work with the architecture group to make sure you have interoperability baked into every thing that is being done there. That's not only systems, so that's not only IT systems, to Ido's point, it's also the processes that make those systems run. And obviously we want to make sure that data is reusable, and making sure we have the quality and the veracity of where that data comes from. So I really started out, the story that I tell is I developed goals and part of NASA strategy that were aligned to the federal data strategy, but also aligned to the organization goals. So NASA is a very engineering-driven culture, right? Develop spacecraft, do scientific missions and research. So the goals of data are to make sure we enable, and luckily digital transformation was starting at that point. Data was at the core of everything we did. So really looking at pain points that organizations were having across the enterprise, and where those common pain points existed. And what we found was data was at the core of everything. So how can we make sure our systems, our project management ways, methodologies are working across the disciplines? How can we share information there? How can we just making sure we have consistency for senior leadership to look across, right? A lot of, we were working early on during COVID. That's what the story I like to tell. We worked with cross agency organizations like HHS and CDC to look at bed data. So we were able to work with our local senior leadership to determine when we needed to push out, when we could come back, when it was safe to come back, when the hospital bed. So we really protected our workforce using data at that time in a very unconventional way that was done previously. So we really helped that. And then really, the CDO is an evangelist, right? You have to really embrace that evangelist role. You have to make sure you tell that story over and over. You're consistent in telling that story, right? And where it can make impacts. And then we really worked on the showing the visibility of our initiatives. We want to make sure that folks knew what we were working on, make sure they saw the value. So we needed to be really open of what worked and what didn't work. So that visibility was key to gain trust. And then we obviously you need to establish the open data program. Data.gov is really how agencies work to share data with citizens that are citizen-centric, citizen-focused. But having an open data program was critical for us. And luckily for us in NASA, our open science community is an open data platform and has been for 20 plus years, 30 plus years. So that data that's observed about our planet, observed about the solar system, is available to the scientific community. And Effie, lastly, we did, and this is the technical aspect of the role, we did gravitate to a enterprise data platform that had a data commons that made sure that everything we developed fit in that platform for use. So we definitely partnered with the CIO community to make sure those tools and capabilities, those processes for showing data was consistent. And that data platform is being used in NASA today and being built out to handle more use cases than we did when I was there. So the team is doing amazing stuff on that platform to making sure we do things consistently, making sure we align the business, and making sure we add value.
Yeah, Ron, what I love there, what you said is the word enable. Specifically, I see organizations use the word data governance and immediately lines of business say governance means no.
Yeah.
So they're like, now they're going to, okay, this is data enablement and moving away from a center of excellence to a center of enablement. But you also made a point about working with the CIO. And now in today's world, we see the CIO and the CDO kind of combining in responsibility. But most organizations have these roles separate. So my last question for both of you is around what is the relationship between the CIO and the CDO? And do you think it makes sense for the roles and responsibility to combine sometime in the future?
Well, so Ido, why don't you take that one first? Because I know you have an opinion on this, and I'll jump in after you. Yeah.
So just because I had the opportunity of, being in both places, so a chief data officer, it's a good question because there's not a definite decision or a definite kind of answer of what's the right thing to do. I can just give the pros and cons for each approach, right? So when you are coming with a very strong background, technical background, and let's say in the financial industry, right? So most of the CDOs that I was working with reported to the CIO, right? Because it was mainly about kind of enabling the technical aspect of it, so data governance and around data lineage and protecting the kind of the databases and making sure the regulation fits, etc. So it was more about kind of the structure of things and kind of the basic things that are required around the data. But mostly it was really evolved later on. My first CDO role was reporting to two people, to the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and the CIO. So in charge of the BI team and data analytics team, but also establishing the data science team and being kind of dotted a responsibility to all of the analytical units around the organization. So it made it possible for me to do my work because those dual management. Then later on, becoming a chief data officer, reporting to the same person as the CIO, And it allowed me, once again, to take it even one step further, but still be in a full alignment with the CIO in terms of the platforms that we chose, and of course, working very closely. But the one thing I do want to address is that throughout the career, I was always in charge of the data engineering team and the data analytics team. Otherwise, you will find yourself, and we saw those examples also, with chief data officers that are reporting to a certain, I don't know, C-level or not, and not being the only customer of the BI team, of the data engineering team. And with that, it would make a lot of conflicts and made eventually the chief data officer to fail in his or her job, because they just were perceived as yet another customer. Only when you have the full control of both aspects, both sides of the equation here, the data engineering team and the analytical units, not just mainly managed directly, but making sure that you're in charge of all the end-to-end data solution provided throughout the organization, then you can really have control of whatever is happening there. Now, once again, having control doesn't mean to manage directly all of the analytical units of the organization. Definitely not. Just means that there's one language in the organization, and you are in charge, that it's being done in a full alignment. The third part is, of course, being the same person doing both roles. There's a huge advantage in once again, not only in charge of the data engineering and data analytics part and the analytical units, but also all of the IT and all of the cyber team, etc. So it kind of gives a full rollout. The cons there is that you're not that concentrated around data as you were when you were just a chief data officer. But I think the pros are far better than the cons in this dual kind of power couple. But once again, it's highly dependent on the approach of the organization, an approach that makes you feel in the organization that the organization is ready for such a change, such as in Delek US case. It's really something that's mostly valued to have the same person doing both roles.
Thanks, Ido. And Ron, I welcome your thoughts here. What have you seen with the separation of the CIO and the CDO role in organizations, and does it make sense for the responsibilities to be combined?
So, Effie, I don't think there's a clear answer to the question for everything. Here are, I think, some of the things to think about. And like Ido, I've held the CIO role, I've held the CDO role. I know what it takes to as a CIO for the operational responsibilities, and that is the primary focus, to make sure the systems are working as designed, right? Operational responsibilities of a CIO to keep things working, not cause pain. However, the role of the CDO is an evangelist, like we talked about, is a change agent, like we talked about, to really stress and do things differently, right? To use approaches like DevSecOps, agile development, to do things in a different way to liberate data. Many organizations have technical debt. We know that. So putting the CIO hat on, you really need to manage that technical debt and really work in a different way to buy that down as much as possible. So that's going to be that role. The CDO role could be, and it could be, a point of contention when you're forcing against taking resources away from the operational responsibilities to keep things up to liberate data. Organizations can make anything work. However, I believe, that the third generation of a CDO really needs to be at the top of or as close to the top of the organizational authority. And I don't say that for power or control or to have a huge area of responsibilities. I say that as a change agent, you will have to work with the decision makers to, if you do have a barrier come up, if you do have a point of contention come up, how do you work through it, right? So, and a lot of that can only be done at that level of the organization. So if the CDO role is buried under the CIO organization, again, you're going to have conflict in the roles in general, but you can make anything work. So, there isn't a perfect answer for everything, but I think the roles of a CDO are to do things differently, to challenge the status quo, and depending on the maturation of the organization, that can work quite well in the CIO shop. However, I still go back to the commercial model, and then what we have here in quantum space. I actually report to the C-suite in my role, and that role in a small startup changes because you do wear multiple hats. So I happen to just inherit the CIO responsibilities for a small company now. So now I'm combined, so that's a little different, Ido, from when we talked last. So I now have two roles, surprise. But I do see it is a symbiotic relationship, because you just can't have a policy, or Effie, to your point, you can't just have data governance and do things from a compliance point of view without that implementation side. So at best, a symbiotic relationship. One can make anything work in any organization, so there isn't one answer. But I think having the voice at the highest levels of the organization is what's required to make this role successful and make the business successful, liberating data for the organization.
Thanks, Ron. And we see that's developing more and more. We see the CDO reporting into the C-suite, and even still, we see the CDO reporting into the CEO. I saw a recent EDM Council benchmark report stating that 20% of organizations have their CDO reporting into their CEO. So it's really exciting to see the evolution of such a, I guess we can still say, relatively new role, growing in traction and having the strategic seat at the C-level table. So I could talk to you both all day long, but really thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Your insights are invaluable. And for those who are listening, thank you so much for your time. If you want to see other interviews, please go to cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan.